Captain Erica Hayes stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching as the Vilcori homeworld of Sarlin grew larger on the view screen. The lush, violet-tinged planet was a symbol of everything that humanity had come to represent in the galaxy: peace, cooperation, and the potential for species to work together, despite their differences. After decades of war and conflict, the galaxy had seen a new era of diplomacy, with humans leading the charge. But Hayes wasn't sure if that reputation would survive this mission. Her crew had been tasked with brokering a peace agreement between the Vilcori and the Dressari, a formidable alien empire that had recently escalated its incursions into neutral space. The Vilcori, though pacifists at heart, had suffered for too long under the Dressari's aggressive expansion. Now, they had turned to humanity for help. "Captain," Lieutenant Maya Harris' voice broke through the hum of the command deck. "We're receiving a transmission from the Dressari warlord Sorak. He insists on speaking directly with you before the meeting." Erica's heart sank. A direct communication from Sorak. The Dressari were known for their brutal tactics, and their warlord was infamous for rejecting any kind of peace talk. The last time a human delegation had faced him, their ship had barely escaped with their lives. "Put him through," Hayes said, her voice steady, but her mind racing. Sorak's image flickered to life on the screen. A towering figure with mottled reptilian skin and glowing red eyes. His voice was a low guttural rumble. "Captain Hayes," Sorak began, his smile showing rows of jagged teeth. "I trust you're ready to negotiate. Or is it that the Deathworlders have come only to die for their weakness?" Hayes kept her face neutral. "We're here to talk peace, Sorak, for the sake of the Vilcori and everyone else in this region." "Peace," he scoffed. "I don't deal in peace, human. I deal in conquest." Before she could respond, the ship's alarms blared. "Captain, we've detected Dressari warships exiting warp," Maya shouted from her station. "They're within striking range." The Vilcori had been ambushed. Sorak had no intention of peace. The negotiation was nothing more than a trap. Erica's stomach twisted, but there was no time to hesitate. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," she barked, her mind already shifting into survival mode. "This is no longer a diplomatic mission. We're going to war." As the Resolute shifted into high gear, the first volley of Dressari fire slammed into their shields, rattling the crew. The peaceful galaxy had just shattered, and Captain Hayes felt it deep in her bones. Humanity's reputation for kindness was about to be tested in ways no one could have anticipated. The Resolute shook under another barrage of Dressari fire, alarms blaring through the halls of the ship. Captain Hayes gripped the armrest of her command chair, her knuckles white. The Vilcori were unarmed, and their fragile homeworld was vulnerable, left exposed by the ambush. If they didn't act fast, Sorak would wipe them out before the first shots had even been fired in earnest. "Captain, shields are holding at 68%, Lieutenant Maya Harris reported, her voice tight with concentration. "But we can't keep this up for long. We need to engage or retreat." "Engage," Hayes said without hesitation, her gaze locked on the view screen. The massive black warships of the Dressari fleet were looming ahead, their sleek, jagged shapes cutting through the stars like predators closing in on their prey. "Target their engines," she ordered, her voice calm but resolute. "We need to cripple their pursuit capability." The Resolute fired first, its photon torpedoes streaking out in a brilliant arc. The explosion rocked one of the smaller Dressari ships, but it only seemed to enrage the enemy. The Dressari returned fire with ruthless precision, tearing through the human ship's shields and sending sparks flying from the console. The Vilcori, observing the carnage from the surface of their planet, transmitted a desperate distress call. Hayes could almost feel the weight of their expectations. Humanity had promised them protection, promised them peace. Now, humanity was fighting to stay alive, and the first few casualties were already being counted. "Hold steady, people," Hayes called out. "We're not backing down." As the battle raged on, Erica's mind flashed back to the mission briefing she had received just days earlier. She had been briefed to avoid conflict at all costs, to try and find common ground between the Vilcori and the Dressari. But that had been before Sorek's true nature had been revealed. This wasn't about diplomacy, it was about survival. "Captain, incoming transmission," Maya said, her voice taut. "It's from the Dressari flagship." Without waiting for confirmation, Hayes signaled for the transmission to be patched through. Sorek's face appeared once more, this time distorted with savage glee. "Tell your people to surrender now, Captain," he said, his voice thick with menace. "I'll spare their lives, for a price. Your peace has no place here." Erica's blood ran cold. It was no longer just the Vilcori at risk. The message was clear. Humanity's kindness, its commitment to peace, had been shattered, and now that they would face the consequences. "Tell him we don't surrender," Hayes said, her voice steely. "We'll fight until the last man." Sorek's laughter echoed in her ears as he cut the transmission. It was a declaration of war. The battle was chaos. Dressari warships surrounded the Resolute, their weapons tearing into the human ship's hull. The Vilcori, helpless and trembling below, were relying on them, on humanity, to stand between them and annihilation. Captain Hayes could feel the weight of that responsibility, and it felt like 1,000 tons pressing down on her chest. "Shields are failing, Captain," Lieutenant Harris shouted, her voice edged with panic. "We can't take much more of this." Erica gritted her teeth, eyes scanning the situation. The Resolute had taken heavy damage already, and if they didn't make a move soon, they would be caught in a full-scale slaughter. She glanced at her tactical display. Dressari reinforcements were already en route. Soon, they'd be overwhelmed. Full thrust, all power to the engines. "Get us out of here now," Hayes barked. The ship jolted as the engines flared to life, slamming the crew back into their seats as they broke away from the surrounding Dressari ships. But the escape was short-lived. A sudden volley from a nearby destroyer shredded their aft shields, sending sparks flying through the bridge. "Damage control to decks 3 and 4, came the call from engineering. "Hull breaches confirmed. Fire suppression systems online." "Get those fires out," Hayes snapped. "We're not giving up now." They had to push through. Hayes knew that if they didn't neutralize the Dressari's ability to pursue, the Vilcori's last hope would be gone. She needed a miracle, or at least a distraction. "Target their lead ship's engines," she ordered. "Concentrate all fire on that flagship. If we can disable it, the rest will scatter." A volley of shots from the Resolute slammed into the Dressari flagship's massive engines, the resulting explosion bright enough to light up the entire sector. For a moment, there was silence. Then the Dressari ship veered off course, temporarily disabled. "We've bought ourselves some time," Harris said with a weary sigh. "But not much." But before Hayes could give the order to regroup, a new voice crackled over the comm. It wasn't from the Dressari. It wasn't even from her crew. "Captain Hayes," came the calm, steady voice of Ambassador Leon Walker, now speaking from the Federation's capital. "You are ordered to stand down. This mission is a failure." "Stand down," Hayes snarled, her eyes narrowing. "We're in the middle of a firefight, Leon. We don't stand down. You've already caused too much damage. This is no longer a peacekeeping mission," Walker said coldly. "Your actions will have consequences. Return to Federation space immediately. This mission is over." The order was a punch to the gut, and Hayes felt her world tilt on its axis. This was no longer just about defending the Vilcori. It was about something far larger. A decision was being made in the heart of the Federation. A decision that would change the course of human history. "Not while we're still alive," Erica muttered under her breath. "Set a course for the Dressari flagship. We're finishing this." The Resolute limped back into Federation space weeks later, its hull scarred, its crew battered. The war that had started so unexpectedly was already leaving its mark. Erica Hayes sat at her desk in the briefing room, staring at the data streams flickering across her screen. Casualty reports, enemy movements, communications intercepted from Triceri outposts. She'd seen too many deaths, too much destruction, and despite everything, the Federation was determined to bury the truth. The doors to the briefing room hissed open, and Ambassador Leon Walker stepped inside, his face set in a grim, unreadable mask. He was dressed in the formal robes of the Federation Council, but the polished look did nothing to mask the tension in his posture. "Captain," he said, his voice clipped, "you've been summoned to Earth. Your actions have raised concerns among the Council." "Concerns?" Hayes shot back, her voice tight. "I followed orders. The Vilcori would be wiped out by now if we hadn't intervened. You know that." Walker's expression darkened, and he glanced at the ground before meeting her eyes again. "You should have known better than to take matters into your own hands. You were ordered to stand down. You disobeyed a direct command." The words hit Hayes like a physical blow. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of the Federation's bureaucracy, not as a force of unity, but as an unfeeling machine, grinding down anyone who didn't fit its narrative. "I didn't disobey. I acted to protect our allies," she countered, her anger rising. "We were outnumbered, and we were left to die. You sent us into the fire, and then pulled back when it got too hot." Walker's lips pressed into a thin line. "The Federation's priorities have changed, Captain. The war is escalating, and we need to be careful about how we're perceived. The public is losing faith. You've made the galaxy think we're weak. Your actions have been—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Uncooperative with the greater mission." "The greater mission?" Hayes echoed, incredulous. "What greater mission?" "To appease the Drissari. To let them wipe out the Vilcori and everyone else who stands in their way." "You don't understand," Walker said softly, almost pleading. "This isn't just about defending anyone. It's about the survival of the Federation. If we push too hard, we risk turning the galaxy against us." The words hung in the air between them, a chilling revelation. The Federation had no intention of defending the weak, of upholding the ideals that had once made humanity stand out. Instead, it was playing the same political game as every other power-hungry species, and in that moment, Erica Hayes realized something. The kindness that humanity had once stood for had already begun to erode. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was at the center of it. But the truth was, they had already begun to lose their way. "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice low, dangerous. "To be like them? Just another empire, another predator?" Walker didn't answer, and in that silence, Hayes knew. The Federation was already moving toward a darker future. This part highlights the growing tension between the ideals that humans once held dear and the pragmatic cold calculus of the political leaders in charge. It's a transition from conflict to the realization that humanity's moral compass is being twisted and manipulated for the sake of power. The confrontation between Hayes and Walker marks a pivotal moment in her journey. She is beginning to see that the stakes are not just survival, but the very soul of humanity itself. The news spread quickly through Federation space. The Iron-Eye, one of humanity's most trusted allies and a race known for their wisdom and peaceful nature, had been completely wiped out. Entire colonies erased in a coordinated attack by a human fleet under the direct orders of General Rayner. The broadcast was brutal, like a punch to the gut. Federation News, the once neutral media outlet, now fully under the control of Rayner's faction, painted the attack as a necessary strike against potential enemies of the state. They claimed the Iron-Eye had been collaborating with the Drissari, selling secrets, providing supplies, and planning to betray humanity. It was a lie. Captain Hayes stood in the briefing room, staring at the transmission on the wall. A grainy video showed the Iron-Eye fleet, their ships shimmering in the glow of their home star, being torn apart by human weapons. The ships, graceful and non-aggressive, had never posed a threat. But they were a liability now, and their entire race was labeled a threat by those who had the power to rewrite the truth. Her heart ached as the voice of Admiral Callahan, a longtime friend of the Iron-Eye, echoed in her mind. We saved you, humans, and this is how you repay us. Captain, we've received a coded transmission from an IRNI survivor, Maya Harris said, her voice tight with urgency. He claims the IRNA were completely innocent. They had no alliance with the Dressari. Patch it through, Hayes said, her stomach twisting. She knew deep down that the Federation wouldn't care, but something inside her refused to ignore the truth. The image of Sarian, a young IRNA diplomat, flickered to life on the screen. His features were drawn, his eyes haunted. Captain Hayes, I don't know if you'll ever receive this message, but I need you to know the truth. We did nothing to betray humanity. We never supported the Dressari. This attack was a lie, a deliberate manipulation to justify Raynor's thirst for blood. His voice trembled, but his words rang with painful clarity. Humanity has been missiled. The Federation has turned its back on its principles. Hayes felt the blood drain from her face. The truth was becoming undeniable. The Federation had betrayed their allies, their friends, and worse, Raynor had engineered this massacre to push humanity further down the path of ruthless conquest. Sarian's image flickered and crackled as he continued. Please, I beg you, find the truth, before more innocents are destroyed. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving nothing but the hollow silence of the bridge. Hayes felt a deep, gnawing anger rise within her. They had been lied to. The Federation was no longer the protector of peace it once claimed to be. It had become an instrument of war, a tool in Raynor's hands. They killed them, Hayes whispered, for nothing. Maya's voice was quiet, but filled with disbelief. The IRNA never did anything wrong. They've learned the cost of kindness, Hayes muttered, and we're all going to pay for it. But something inside her snapped. The time for waiting was over. If she was going to stop this, if humanity was going to have any chance of redemption, she had to act now. Get me Admiral Ryan, she ordered. We're going after Raynor. The fleet was assembling. Admiral Kyle Ryan, one of the few remaining military leaders with a shred of integrity, had agreed to join Hayes' resistance. It hadn't been an easy decision for him. He had once served under General Raynor, and his reputation had been built on the belief that military might was the only way to ensure humanity's survival. But the massacre of the IRNI had shattered that belief. Ryan had seen firsthand the horrors of unchecked aggression, and he knew the tide of war was turning. Hayes stood before him in the secure briefing room aboard the Resolute, her face grim but resolute. Ryan was older than she remembered, graying at the temples, his once pristine uniform now worn and frayed. But his eyes, though tired, were sharp. She could tell he wasn't just a former admiral. He was a man on the edge of something far more important. I didn't think I'd ever be on this side of the war, Ryan said, his voice heavy with regret. He stared out the window at the sprawling fleet of resistance ships now assembled in orbit, a ragtag group of former Federation vessels, private mercenaries, and neutral colonies that had begun to rally to their cause. But I'm here now. And so are you. What's the plan? Raynor's gone too far, Hayes replied, her voice firm. He's turning humanity into the very thing we used to fight against, an empire of destruction. We're going to stop him before he completely burns the galaxy down. I've got intel on his flagship, the Empyrean. It's the heart of his power. If we can take it out, we'll cripple the war effort. Raynor will have no choice but to back down. Ryan folded his arms, considering her words carefully. And how you plan on getting close to Empyrean? It's a fortress. We'll need a way to infiltrate. The Federation's intelligence network is gone. They've been complicit in Raynor's rise. We don't have the resources we once did. Hayes' lips tightened. We've got something better. Vorin. Ryan raised an eyebrow. The Dressari defector. You trust him? I do, she said. Vorin has been working as Raynor's advisor for months. He knows the flagship inside and out, and he's willing to help us. We just need to get him on board. Ryan was quiet for a moment, and Hayes could see him weighing the risks, the stakes. Finally, he nodded. Then let's do it, Ryan said, his voice steely with determination. We'll take the Empyrean down. Once Raynor falls, the war will shift. We can end this, Erica, but it's going to take everything we've got." Hayes' eyes hardened. "Then we give everything. No more half measures. This ends now." As the fleet prepared for their final push, Erica knew there was no going back. The galaxy was already scared by humanity's choices, and now they were at the crossroads. They could either fall further into darkness or fight to reclaim what humanity had once stood for. There was no room for hesitation, no space for mercy. Raynor had stolen the future, but they could still fight for it. "Prepare to move out," Hayes ordered. "We're going after Raynor. And this time, we take no prisoners." This part heightens the stakes of the conflict and deepens the resolve of the protagonists. Hayes and Ryan's plan to confront Raynor on his flagship introduces a new ally, Vorin, and sets the stage for a bold and dangerous mission. The tension between the ideals they once upheld and the ruthless pragmatism they now face continues to build as they prepare for the decisive battle. The Resolute was the spearhead of the small but growing resistance fleet, flanked by an assortment of ships, some ex-Federation war vessels, some civilian transports repurposed for combat. Their mission was clear: infiltrate the heavily fortified Empyrean, Raynor's flagship, and bring it down before it could carry out another one of its deadly strikes. The rendezvous with Vorin, the Dressari defector, was set to take place in the shadow of a gas giant in the Gulmar system, a remote sector where Federation surveillance was weak. Vorin had promised the critical intel they needed, but his arrival was also their first real test. If he betrayed them, this mission would fail before it even began. Erica Hayes stood in the war room, her fingers tapping against the cold metal table. The plan was ambitious, too ambitious, but it was the only shot they had. Her crew, the few loyal commanders who had stood by her after the Aranai massacre, were ready to move. They had no choice. "Admiral Ryan's ships are in position," Maya Harris reported, her voice steady despite the tension. "All vessels are prepped and ready for the strike. The Empyrean is still in orbit around Salnesh. We have a narrow window to board." "Then we'll take it," Hayes replied, her voice low and determined. Suddenly, the communications panel beeped. A transmission was coming through, encrypted but unmistakable in its origin. Hayes' heart skipped a beat. "Captain Hayes," came Vorin's voice, rough but clear. The image of the Dressari flashed onto the screen. His features sharp and angular, the characteristic purple tint of his skin a stark contrast to the dim background. His amber eyes glinted with something unreadable. "I have the codes to access the Empyrean's docking bays. But know this, if Raynor finds out I'm helping you, he will kill me." "Then you better make sure he doesn't," Hayes said, her voice colder than she intended. "I'll do my part, but remember, Captain, Raynor isn't just a man. He's become a symbol, a force of power that's swept through humanity like wildfire. He won't be easy to bring down. The Empyrean, it's more than just a warship. It's a fortress, a weapon, and a reflection of everything your Federation has become. If you destroy it, you might just destroy the last of humanity's soul." Her breath caught at his words. She had known Raynor was dangerous, but Vorin's warning held a deeper weight. This mission wasn't just about stopping an enemy, it was about killing the very ideals they had once fought to protect. "Then we'll make sure it burns," Erica said, more to herself than to Vorin. The comm went dark, and for a moment, the room was silent. "The fleet is moving into position," Maya said, breaking the stillness. "It's now or never, Captain." Erica nodded, her jaw clenched. This was the endgame. If they couldn't take Raynor down now, the galaxy would be lost to the corruption he had spread. But if they succeeded, if they could destroy the Empyrean, humanity would have a chance to rebuild. "Prepare the boarding team," Hayes ordered, her eyes steely with resolve. "We're going in." This part builds toward the climax, with Vorin's critical information setting up the infiltration of Raynor's flagship. The stakes are heightened as the crew prepares for what may be their final mission, and Erica confronts the darker reality of what they might be about to do. Not just defeat an enemy, but destroy the very heart of the Federation's corruption. It's a moment of reckoning for both the characters and humanity itself. The Resolute crept silently toward the Empyrean, the heart of Raynor's war machine, its massive silhouette looming ahead like a dark monolith. In the shadow of the star, the once glorious Federation flagship now appeared more like a tomb, silent, foreboding, and waiting for the blow that would bring it crashing down. Docking bay access codes are live. Voron's voice crackled over the comm. You'll have 10 minutes before security scrambles the system. After that, it's all or nothing. Understood, Captain Hayes replied, her voice low but steady. She was flanked by a handful of trusted officers, Lieutenant Harris, Tactical Expert Derek Calloway, and Commander Sarah Reyes, an experienced Marine who would lead the boarding party. They were going to board the flagship, infiltrate its command center, and take Raynor down. This was the only shot they had. The rest of the fleet would be a distraction, fighting off Raynor's reinforcements, keeping the Federation's larger ships occupied while they made their move. The docking operation was smooth, thanks to Voron's inside knowledge of the Empyrean systems. The shuttle settled into the bay without triggering the ship's alarms. The door hissed open, and Hayes led her team through the narrow, sterile corridors of the flagship. There was no time to hesitate. Stay sharp, Hayes murmured as they moved deeper into the ship. We're not just taking down a man. We're dismantling everything he stands for. The crew advanced, weapons drawn, hearts pounding. The corridors were eerily quiet, too quiet. They passed empty chambers and silent, cold control rooms, signs of Raynor's purges and his increasing paranoia. There was no sign of resistance, but Hayes knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down. Approaching the command center, Rice said over the comm, her voice tense but controlled. They arrived at the sealed door to the heart of the Empyrean. Beyond it was Raynor, and everything they had fought for. The door slid open, revealing the dark, cavernous room beyond. At its center, bathed in a dim, sickly light, was General Raynor, standing tall, his uniform immaculate, his cold eyes fixed on them, as if he had been expecting them all along. I knew you'd come for me, Captain, Raynor said, his voice smooth, almost soothing. But you're too late. You've already lost. Hayes' pulse quickened as she met his gaze. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a symbol of the Federation's descent into madness. His vision of humanity had become one of ruthless conquest, and it was clear he would stop at nothing to keep it that way. Not yet, Hayes replied, her voice hardening with resolve. This is the end, Raynor. Without warning, she ordered her team to fire. The shot rang out, but Raynor was fast. He ducked behind a reinforced panel just as the blast hit. A surge of energy crackled around him, and the walls shook with the force of an explosion. He was not going to go down easily. You think you're fighting for the soul of humanity? Raynor sneered, his eyes glowing with dangerous confidence. This galaxy doesn't care about your ideals. It only cares about strength. And I am strength. The room erupted into chaos. As Raynor's guards rushed in, the battle became a frantic blur of gunfire and shouts. But Hayes wasn't focused on the skirmish. Her eyes never left Raynor. He was the key to it all, the symbol of the darkness that had overtaken humanity. If they could bring him down, they could end the war and stop the Federation from descending into totalitarian rule. In a single decisive move, Hayes pushed forward, firing as she went, cutting through Raynor's security detail. Finally, as she reached the center of the room, she confronted him face to face. Her weapon was raised. Raynor's smile twisted into something almost pitying. You're too late, Captain, he repeated. I've already won. Erica's finger tightened on the trigger. No, she whispered. You haven't. The shot rang out, and everything went still. With Raynor's fall, the Empyrean began to crumble. Its systems flickered, and without its leader, the entire fleet began to falter. Outside, the Resistance fleet launched their final assault, striking at the heart of Raynor's remaining forces. It was over. Humanity's last chance at redemption had come, not through diplomacy or negotiation, but through the will to stand up against the darkness that had consumed them. Captain Hayes stood amidst the wreckage, the weight of the moment heavy on her shoulders. The galaxy was broken, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance to rebuild. But one thing was certain: humanity's kindness, once lost, had been reclaimed, not through mercy, but through the courage to fight for what was right. The war was over, and now they could finally begin again.